And the tension here is between institution as enabler and institution as obstacle. When you're dealing with the left-hand edge of one of these distributions, when you're dealing with the people who spend a lot of time producing a lot of the material you want, that's an institution as enabler world. You can hire those people as employees, you can coordinate their work, and you can get some output. But when you're down here, where the psycho-milts of the world are adding one photo at a time, right, that's institution as obstacle, right? Institutions hate being told they're obstacles. One of the first things that happens when you institutionalize a problem is that the institution, the first goal of the institution immediately shifts from whatever the nominal goal was to self-preservation. And the actual goal of the institution goes to 2 through n. Right? So when institutions are told they are obstacles and that there are other ways of coordinating the value, they go through something a little bit like the Kubler-Ross stages of reaction being told you have a fatal illness. Denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. Most of the cooperative systems we've seen haven't been around long enough to have gotten to the acceptance phase. Many institutions are still in denial. But we're seeing recently a lot of both anger and bargaining. There's a wonderful small example going on right now. In France, a bus company is suing people for forming a carpool, right? Because the fact that they have coordinated themselves to create cooperative value is depriving them of revenue. You can follow this in The Guardian. It's actually quite entertaining. The bigger question is, what do you do about the value down here? Right? How do you capture that? And the institutions, as I've said, are prevented from capturing that. Steve Ballmer, now CEO of Microsoft, was criticizing Linux a couple of years ago, and he said, oh, this business of thousands of programmers contributing to Linux, this is a myth. Right? We've looked at who's contributed to Linux, and most of the patches have been produced by programmers who've only done one thing. Right? You can hear this distribution under that complaint. And you can see why, from Ballmer's point of view, that's a bad idea, right? We hired this programmer, he came in, he drank our Cokes and played foosball for 3 years, and he had one idea, right? Bad hire, right? The psycho-milt question is, was it a good idea? What if it was a security patch? What if it was a security patch for a buffer overflow exploit, of which Windows has not some several? Do you want that patch? Right? The fact that a single programmer can, without having to move into a professional relation to an institution, improve Linux once and never be seen from again, should terrify Ballmer. Because this kind of value is unreachable in classic institutional frameworks, but it is part of cooperative systems, of open source software, of file sharing, of the Wikipedia. I've used a lot of examples from Flickr, but there are actually stories about this from all over. Meetup, a service founded so that users could find people in their local area who share their interests and affinities, and actually have a real-world meeting offline in a cafe or a pub or what have you. When Scott Heiferman founded Meetup, he thought it would be used for, train spotters and cat fanciers, classic affinity groups. The inventors don't know what the invention is. Number one group on Meetup right now, most chapters in most cities with most members, most active, stay-at-home moms. Right? In the suburbanized, dual-income United States, stay-at-home moms are actually missing the social infrastructure that comes from extended family and local small-scale neighborhoods. So they're reinventing it using these tools. Meetup is the platform, but the value here is in social infrastructure. If you want to know what technology is going to change the world, don't pay attention to 13-year-old boys. Pay attention to young mothers, because they have got not an ounce of support for technology that doesn't materially make their lives better. This is so much more important than Xbox, but it's a lot less glitzy. I think this is a revolution. Right. I think that this is a really profound change in the way human affairs are arranged. And I use that word advisedly. It's a revolution in that it's a change in equilibrium. Right? It's a whole new way of doing things, which includes new downsides. In the United States right now, a woman named Judith Miller is in jail for not having given to a federal grand jury her sources. She's a reporter for the New York Times. Her sources in a very abstract and hard-to-follow case. And journalists are in the street rallying to improve the SHIELD laws. The SHIELD laws are our laws, pretty much a patchwork of state laws, that prevent a journalist from having to betray a source. This is happening, however, against the background of the rise of weblogging. Weblogging is a classic example of mass amateurization. It has deprofessionalized publishing. Want to publish globally anything you think today? It is a one-button operation that you can do for free, right? That has sent the professional class of publishing down into the ranks of mass amateurization. And so the Shield Law, right, as much as we want it, right, we want a professional class of truth tellers, it is becoming increasingly incoherent because the institution is becoming incoherent, right? There are people in the States right now tying themselves into knots, trying to figure out whether or not bloggers are journalists. And the answer to that question is, it doesn't matter, because that's not the right question. Journalism was an answer to an even more important question, which is, how will society be informed? How will they share ideas and opinions? And if there is an answer to that that happens outside the professional framework of journalism, it makes no sense to take a professional metaphor and apply it to this distributed class. So as much as we want the Shield laws, the background, the institution to which they were attached is becoming incoherent. So another example, Pro-Ana, the Pro-Ana groups. These are groups of teenage girls who've taken on weblogs, bulletin boards, other kinds of cooperative infrastructure, and have used it to set up support groups for remaining anorexic by choice. They post pictures of thin models, which they call Thinspiration. They have little slogans like salvation through starvation. They even have Lance Armstrong-style bracelets, these red bracelets, which signify in the small group, I am trying to maintain my eating disorder. They trade tips, like if you feel like eating something, clean a toilet or the litter box. The feeling will pass, right? We're used to support groups being beneficial, right? We have an attitude that support groups are inherently beneficial, but it turns out that the logic of the support group is value neutral. A support group is simply a small group that wants to maintain a way of living in the context of a larger group. Now, when the larger group is a bunch of drunks and the small group wants to stay sober, then we think that's a great support group. But when the small group is teenage girls who want to stay anorexic by choice, then we're horrified. What's happened is that the normative goals of the support groups that we're used to came from the institutions that were framing them and not from the infrastructure. Once the infrastructure becomes generically available, the logic of the support group has been revealed to be accessible to anyone, including people pursuing these kinds of goals. So there are significant downsides to these changes as well as upsides. And of course, in the current environment, one need allude only lightly to the work of non-state actors trying to influence global affairs and taking advantage of these. This is a social map of the hijackers and their associates who perpetrated the 9/11 attack. It was produced by analyzing their communications patterns using a lot of these tools, and doubtless the intelligence communities of the world are doing the same work today for the attacks of last week. Now, this is the part of the talk where I tell you what's going to come as a result of all of this, but I'm running out of time, which is good, because I don't know. Right. As with the printing press, if it's really a revolution, it doesn't take us from point A to point B. It takes us from point A to chaos. Right? The printing press precipitated 200 years of chaos, moving from a world where the Catholic Church was the sort of organizing political force to the Treaty of Westphalia, when we finally knew what the new unit was, the nation state. Now, I'm not predicting 200 years of chaos as a result of this. 50 years in which loosely coordinated groups are going to be given increasingly high leverage. And the more those groups forego traditional institutional imperatives like deciding in advance what's going to happen or the profit motive, the more leverage they'll get. And institutions are going to come under an increasing degree of pressure, and the more rigidly managed and the more they rely on information monopolies, the greater the pressure is going to be. And that's going to happen one arena at a time, one institution at a time. The forces are general, but the results are going to be specific. And so the point here is not, this is wonderful, or we're going to see a transition from only institutions to only cooperative framework. It's going to be much more complicated than that. But the point is that it's going to be a massive readjustment. And since we can see it in advance and know it's coming, my argument is essentially we might as well get good at it. Thank you very much.